Welcome back to the Spoken Word. My name is Travis. I'm your host. And today we're going to be continuing our story about this time that Israel is sitting at Mount Sinai and God is establishing this covenant with them. But we're going to find in this episode that things come off the cart really, really quickly. So, just to recap a little bit of what we talked about in our previous episode, Israel has been delivered from Egypt. They make it to Mount Sinai. God shows himself to Moses and to several other people. There's the beginning of this covenant that's going to be established between them where he's going to be their God, they're going to be his people. And we see all these instructions about law and how to be God's people given to Moses. And I really wanted to zoom in for a minute on some of the ideas that are being presented here, especially with the way that things like the tabernacle, this sacred tent that Moses is given the instructions for, how the tabernacle and things in the tabernacle are actually expressing a really significant idea. So if you read through these chapters of Exodus, so we're talking about, say, Exodus 24 through the early 30s, you're going to see all of these instructions given about the tabernacle and about things that are in the tabernacle. But what I want to point out is that in these ceremonial objects and in the practices that will happen inside the tabernacle and all of this stuff, God actually seems to, in some way, be inviting humans back to the Garden of Eden in some sense. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, we see a few things here that are really Garden of Eden evoking images. We see that there are cherubim that are on the Ark of the Covenant, which is this box that is going to carry the stone tablets of the covenant. We see cherubim also on some of the curtains that are going to be in the tabernacle. And where was the last place that we saw cherubim? We last saw cherubim outside the Garden of Eden, guarding the way and preventing access to the tree of life. And we saw that in the area of the stories of Genesis 3 and 4. So that was the last place that we saw cherubim. So I think that the narrative is trying to make a connection here between those two things. The other thing that we see are all of these plant motifs. We see the menorah, which is that big lampstand that has 7 different lamps on it that I had mentioned in the previous episode. That lampstand itself is described as having branches, almost like it's a tree. And the lampstand has these motifs of almond blossoms on it. And almonds come from a tree. So this lampstand is, in my estimation, maybe being a reference back to the tree of life. So we're supposed to be seeing all of this garden imagery here. We have the lampstand. We even see on the priestly robes that there are pomegranate motifs that are on it. Again, that's this idea of fruit. So we see some of the angelic entities that we saw from the Garden of Eden. We see all this garden imagery all over the place. And this is going to be a place where God's presence is. So I think what we should be internalizing in our minds is that the tabernacle is almost going to be, in some way, a little miniature mobile Garden of Eden. So we were just thinking back in the Genesis account of, okay, who's going to be the person who's going to crush the head of the serpent, and how's God going to deal with this, and all these things. And then now we're moving in, and as a reader, you should be thinking, oh, wait a minute. Is the Garden of Eden coming back? Are we getting back into the presence of God? Is this going to be fixed right here and now? So as you're reading through there, this is the whole setup. And the whole point of all of this is found in Exodus 29, verses 45 through 46, where God says, I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. And they will know that I am Yahweh, their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt, so that I might dwell among them. I am Yahweh, their God. So the whole point here is that God is going to come and dwell with the Israelites. So this is the big setup. This is the big celebration. Moses is up on the mountain getting all of these instructions, and it looks like things are going to be amazing because we have not seen God dwelling with people like this since the Garden of Eden narrative. But then you get over to Exodus 32 and you get a major, major letdown. While Moses is still up on the mountain, you have this whole camp of Israelites down at the feet of Mount Sinai, and people get a little antsy. And some people come up to Aaron, Moses' brother, and they say, "Hey, Aaron, we don't know what's happened to this Moses guy. Doesn't really seem to be that anything's happening up there. And we'd kind of like some gods." So I don't know if there was kind of some civil unrest happening here or what, but it seems to be maybe that there's fear that they've been abandoned or who knows what. But regardless, these people come to Aaron and they get the broad idea to make some gods on their own. They're going to make elohim for themselves. That's what the wording is there. So that word elohim that I've brought up multiple times as referring to spiritual beings, it kind of shows you the absurdity of what's getting ready to happen here because they're saying, oh, we need to make elohim for ourselves. Well, that's absurd, right? You can't make true elohim. So it just shows the brazenness and absurdity of this. You literally have God himself up on Mount Sinai. The elders of Israel have seen him. Moses is up there currently. Aaron and some of his sons have seen God by this point. And yet, these people have the absurd notion of making a God for themselves. And Aaron is spineless enough to go along with this. He has people bring him all kinds of gold and they melt it down and they make a golden calf. And people start holding this big festival for it. Aaron kind of seems to try and toe the line a little bit. And he says, well, we're going to have a festival, but it's going to be a festival to Yahweh. It's going to be a festival to the Lord. Well, that doesn't really cut it because God takes notice of this. Moses comes down from the mountain. He sees all this absurdity happening and Moses loses it. I mean, you can't really blame him. He's just been in the presence of God for days on end. Then he comes back down and he sees a bunch of people running around worshiping this chunk of gold that they've made with their own hands and calling it a god. So Moses actually throws down the stone tablets that he had that had the words of the covenant written on it. And he goes down to figure out what's happening. He confronts Aaron. He's like, what are you doing? And Aaron goes, well, it wasn't really my fault. People, they kind of make me do it. And I just threw all the gold into the fire and out popped this calf. Moses has to be sitting there thinking, yeah, likely story. Anyway, so Moses goes and takes this idol that they've made, this golden calf, and he grinds it down and puts it in the water and makes people drink it. There's bloodshed of Israelites. There's a instance of the sons of Levi, the Levites, who are taken by Moses and say that, you guys need to go out and basically execute some people for this atrocity that they've committed. And there's just this great number of Israelites that die as part of this whole event. And you would think that, has Israel just totally blown it at this point. And God is understandably upset about all of this. And at one point in this story, he actually tells Moses, you know what? I've had it with these people. I'm just going to destroy all of them and I'm going to make a new nation from you. Moses steps in, says, let's not do that. And the people of Israel are ultimately preserved on the whole. But Moses does go back to God and tries to intercede for them and asks for God's pardon, asks for his forgiveness. And God does provide pardon for them. He doesn't utterly destroy them. And in Exodus 34, we see that some of these laws are reiterated. God does say that he's going to send an angel ahead of the Israelites to drive out the people that are currently living in the land of Canaan. He's going to give that land to them just like he told Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he's going to stay faithful to his promises. But there's an interesting focus that is here in some of these commands and elsewhere. And when God is telling Israel what to do as they're going to go up towards the land of Canaan, basically he says, don't take any prisoners, don't leave anyone alive, don't make treaties with people, because otherwise these Canaanites are going to ensnare you and are going to get you to worship their gods. So there is kind of this underlining idea here that this is going to be a conquest that is going to be pursued for spiritual reasons. It's not just because, oh, hey, there's people occupying your land, and therefore we're going to just kill a bunch of people so we can take their stuff. That's not really the idea of the conquest of Canaan that we're going to be talking about a number of episodes from now. There's this underlining idea that there is something very, very corrupt about these people in Canaan. And we see again and again and again God harping on this idea of not worshiping other elohim besides himself. We even see this reiterated once again in Exodus 34, verse 17, where God, who has already given the Ten Commandments, who've already said, don't have other elohim besides himself, don't make idols for yourselves, all that kind of stuff. We see it reiterated here in this chapter again, verse 17, where it says, do not make cast images of gods for yourselves, like you guys just did in Exodus 32 with the gold calf problem. So we just see this idea getting harped on again and again and again. And one of the very things that God tells the Israelites to do is to tear down the altars of the Canaanites, to cut down their Asherah poles. Asherah was a deity that was worshipped in Canaan. So as part of this moving into Canaan, there is this spiritual conquest that's supposed to be happening as well. Ultimately, new tablets are made. The ark and the tabernacle and all of its trappings are built. And that kind of brings the narrative of Exodus down to a close. At the very end, we see the tabernacle made. We see God coming and dwelling inside of the tabernacle and taking up residence there. So we do see these things ultimately get worked out, but we still have that promise of getting the land in Canaan to deal with. And we've seen that the people of Israel aren't completely blameless, that we still have issues, that we still have this issue of wanting to serve other gods besides Yahweh. And so the question is going to be, how does God work with these imperfect people, just like how he has worked with their ancestors? But for now, I'm actually going to pause the narrative here at Mount Sinai. Things have kind of been worked out. We have the priesthood being installed and all of these other things. But I'm going to pause, and we're going to spend a few episodes talking about some of the theological implications of these early chapters of Exodus that we've gone through. And we're going to talk a little bit about the biblical understanding of pagan deities. We're going to talk about what all of this, like blood sacrifice and atonement and all that kind of stuff means. And we're going to have a fun time and talk about some of the archaeology around Exodus a little bit that I hope that some of you will find fascinating. So we're just going to pause the narrative here. Israel is still at Mount Sinai. Things have kind of been worked out, and they're going to be launching off toward the land of Canaan whenever we pick up the storyline of the narrative a few episodes from now. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you learned something from this. And until next time, God bless.